Hi, I'm Molly.
And I'm Jamie, and this is our From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast. As the owners of Hired Hand website software, we've been developing websites and creating internet marketing strategies for livestock breeders for the past 10 years.
The majority of our customers are involved in the breeding of registered animals, such as Texas Longhorns, Highland cattle, horses, and white-tailed deer, where the pedigrees are very important. The From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast examines many of the differences in raising pedigreed livestock for maximum profit. Join us and learn what we're covering today.
Today I'm here with Mike Rienhardt of YMI Cattle Company from upstate New York. Thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me, Molly.
Why don't you start and just tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your ranch.
Okay. Well, my background is I actually come from the dairy world. I grew up on a dairy farm, worked on dairy farms, had cattle. And up to 2016, we were actually running a small dairy herd, show cattle for the kids and all of that. So I've been in agriculture my whole life. And we're in upstate New York, which is just south of Syracuse, about 20 miles, and just kind of on the edge of the Finger Lakes, so hill country. I left. It's one of the people I talk about hills, and I'm like, you don't understand. So
A little different than the Texas hill country, I'm sure.
yeah. So what else did you want to know?
I think you covered it. Let's talk a little bit about your ranch name. So, first of all, if folks have not been to your website or looked at your store or something, I encourage them to do so because I think you guys have one of the coolest logos, that we've seen in a while. So your ranch name is YMI Cattle Company. And then your logo, I'll just kind of leave that mystery up to folks if they're not familiar, but highly recommend they check it out. But how did you come up with that? What is that like? Well, tell us the origin of that.
The why am I part. So even when I was in dairy cattle, dairy cattle is a lot of work, and one of the kind of our core philosophies as a family was always, you'd wake up, why are you doing something, and that's where the why am I, because that's kind of a mantra for us. If we wake up and we don't know why we're doing it today, then it's probably time to evaluate whether we should be doing something. So that's where the why am I comes from. It also makes some very creative names for our cattle. We have a heifer that we show, why am I Geronimo as Papa Top. I've got some creative names already thought out. I just got to get the right combination going. So it's just one of these days I'm going to have one of them. Name one, why am I Dance Sidekick? So when Chase reads it, he has to say that. So
That's awesome.
Like that. So that's the meaning behind the name. The logo, actually, my daughter came up with that, worked with somebody. We were trying to, it's funny. Originally, the ranch started off, it was kind of my thing, and we can get into those stories if you want to. But when the next generation decided to get involved is when we switched to the YMI Cattle Company, and now it's myself, my wife, my daughter, her husband, and my son. And then Alex's family, that's the North Carolina end, we have a few down there for them to play with. So when we were creating the logo for that, we had the older generation and the younger generation. So I think our logo kind of merged, the modern with the traditional. Mm-hmm. And Mackenzie did a great job coming up with that.
For sure. I would completely agree. It's one of those that you look at it, but then you have to look back at it again and make sure you got the full picture.
Yeah. So we struggled with that for a little while because we kept getting, and it just wasn't it. And then when that came across, it just looked really cool. So.
Nice. So you touched on it a little bit, but tell me a little bit more. I know we were hoping some of your family could join us today, and everyone kind of got crazy with their schedules, but tell me a little bit more about how your family's involved and also a little bit more about the history you mentioned.
Yeah. So as I said, we come from a dairy background. We did not get started into Longhorns until spring of 2021. So we've only been in about 3.5 years. As I said, we had a dairy herd. We used to show cattle across the country, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York. We had Brown Swiss and Holsteins. And when we got out of that, the kids were getting older in high school. And for about 5 years, we didn't have any cattle. And we just we had some property that was getting overgrown. And just like typically like everybody else, we're like, we got to get something in here to kind of keep this stuff down. Coming from that world with, really good show cattle, Herefords and Angus didn't excite us at all, My son and I were sitting out there one day and we go, well, if we got something cool, then we could put something in here. So next thing I know, somehow I found Longhorns on a website, and then I ended up finding out there were actually some in New York with Mike Albanese. Went and checked out his herd to see some in person, and that was really interesting. So we got out to Sand Creek auctions, and there were 3 or 4 animals in one farm that were being sold. So to me, that was a logical thing. Bought them all. My son and I jumped in our truck and trailer on Friday morning, drove to Texas. We were back by Monday evening, and that's how we got started with Longhorns. At first, it was to get Longhorns, just to get Longhorns. And then as I got looking into the breed, I realized that the genetic side, the purebred side of it, which I've been doing for 40 years in the dairy world, was very intriguing. So that's kind of how we developed that. As we got going, the kids decided they wanted to be involved. My daughter's fiance, who's active military, he's actually stationed in northern New York at Fort Drum, got involved, and then we decided to create the cattle company, or the LLC, and the kids own the majority of that. So that's where we started from.
Nice. So do you still have those original ones you drove to Texas for, or have you made some changes since then?
Well, like everybody, when you first get them, you get the ones that just look good. And there was an 80-inch cow in there, an older cow. Unfortunately, she was basically given to us because she was like 16, and she lived a couple of years and passed away. But I do not have any of the original cows, but I do have the first calf out of those cows that was born on the place, and she's a really good 2-year-old. She's had a calf now. But those cows are actually, I think all 3 of them are nearby. Well, 2 out of them are nearby with people getting started. So I know where they are, and they're still doing well.
Nice. So you touched on it a little bit, but you said you come from a very strong background with breeding dairy cattle and understanding pedigrees and genetics and everything. Walk me through what your breeding philosophy for the Longhorns has become.
Okay. I think that's an evolving thing. So one of the really interesting things for me coming from the dairy world to the Longhorn world, at first, when I first got into it, I was like, well, what makes a Longhorn valuable? And most people would say tip to tip or color. That was the generic answers you got. So we started in the spring, and our first Longhorn event was that fall. We went down to Virginia to Ann Gravitt's place. Didn't know anybody. Walked down there, just blind, and saw the futurity and trying to figure out what the heck was going on there. Watched a sale. There were some animals in there that year that sold some pretty good money, $35,000 plus. And I'm like, wow. And so that's where I started to put the pieces together about the genetic side of it. However, coming from the dairy world, my view on it may be different than most people's, because I'm a very big confirmation type person. Longevity was paramount to what we did before. That's why we love the Brown Swiss breed so much, because they would live into their teens. We'd get multiple generations. The idea was to create a mature cow that would get better over time. So that was one point that really stuck out at me. So then when people started, everything was tip to tip or color, what I would see happen in sales is that I would see animals that I did not functionally think were very good bring a lot of money. And so it took a little while to find the right people that could speak my language, and at least kind of point me in the right direction. So once we figured that out, I've never shifted from the type of animal I like, the conformation style, but it's just bringing in the right bloodlines for the horn length, color, that kind of thing, in understanding genetics. I mean, I think I have a huge advantage over most people coming into the Longhorn world just because I've had 40 years of experience in a whole other breed. I said this very early on to somebody, and not in a derogatory way by any means, but what I found out really quickly is that there are a lot of people in the Longhorn world who own cows, but they're not necessarily a lot of cow people. And what I meant by that was they just hadn't been around cows their whole life. A lot of times it's the first experience with cattle is owning Longhorns and looking at things. Hey, she's pretty. She's got good horns, that kind of thing, where I'm able to look at an animal and say, I can see in 4 years that cow's feet and legs are going to fall apart. I can see this, so it's just a different spin on it. But I love talking to it about it. I've been on Andrew Shigori's podcast and, talking about some of this stuff and how it relates to Longhorns. So I think I got off on a tangent, but sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. So let's touch on one thing you mentioned, and tell me a little bit about the bloodlines that you're using in your program today and what you're hoping they bring into it for some of the traits that you're looking for.
Yeah, so for us in upstate New York, again, different parts of the country need different things. But for us, in my opinion, I think these are some of the words that are lost in the English language today. In my opinion, this is the fact. But I like a bigger framed animal. They have more capacity to maintain body heat. Where we're at, our average snowfall is 120 inches a year. So, we need them to be able to maintain heat. So a frail animal will struggle more than a larger framed animal. Also, I want them to be able to be up out of the snow. So I like a bigger animal. Now, I totally get in South, East or West Texas, that's not ideal. You're dealing with heat all the time. So we like those. Again, conformation, top lines are extremely important to me because the top line puts everything together in an animal as far as your pelvic, the way that falls together. And so we want really good top line animals, larger animals, and good feet and legs. One of the things I do think that's overlooked in Longhorn, and I'm probably very critical on just coming from the dairy world, is udder attachments and how they're attached. And I put a picture on Facebook not too long ago of a 12-year-old cow that just has a beautiful udder under her, and that's what we should be striving for, and then you're not always going to get it. But so bloodline, so it was probably the following spring at G&G, I happened to run into Johnny Hicks, and Johnny's a guy that will talk with you forever, and you can ask a million questions, and he's right there. And I started describing to him, some of my frustrations and what I was looking for. And immediately Johnny said, well, these are the herds you need to go to see. They're the type of cattle that you're looking for. And so one of those was Tom Smith's, went up to Tom's place. I stopped in at Mark Hubble's and some of those Michigan guys. But, there were some different herds. And before we went to Tom's, one of the things I said to him, we were looking through Johnny's herd. And, one of the things that his herd is very apparent is, they have tremendous rump width and structure. And I go, well, where did this come from? Did it come from, the cows, or did it come from, a lot of these were hydro daughters, or did it come from the bull side? But when we got over to Tom's place, it was apparent where it was coming from because a lot of Tom's cows were like that. And so that style of cow, so we have some Sunrise, WS Sunrise bloodlines in our herd. Both are bulls. One is direct from Tom's herd. One is out of Johnny's herd, but is a hydro son. That looks almost like hydro. So those types of lines. Now, the other side of the thing, which is intriguing enough, is also one of my bloodlines that I really like is the Jamaicism bloodlines, because I believe they're a slower maturing animal, but they have longevity. There's a lot of really good older Jamaicism cattle. So that's another one. One of the things we're looking at is maybe crossing some, tough genetics on those Sunrise Genetics to see if we can get a little more flesh on some of them, that kind of thing. But like I said, we could be in the woods all day, Molly, if we start hunting.
So, like, how many years out are you really excited for?
Am I really? I think, I guess rephrase that question, because that's a trick question. How many years out am I really excited for?
Well, I'm sure you probably have your next, 5, 6, 7 breeding strategies planned. So how patient do you think you're going to have to be? Like, at what point are you super excited that there might actually be some animals on the ground that are bringing together everything that you're trying to do?
Yes, you have to have a long-term focus. So in cattle genetics in general, it's not for everybody because it is a patient game. What you're creating today, that mating you're making today, is 9 months away from actually being born. It's, in my opinion, another 2 to 3 years before you really know what you have. I want to see that heifer have a calf, have an udder. Where are we at 3 years old? So in that process, you're at 4 years in at that point. So I think, to answer your question, what are you most excited about? It varies, because I'm most excited about, in the next short term, the calves that are hitting the ground this fall. Long term, about how some of my calves are going to look in 2 years, and generationally, because the kids are involved, what they can do with what we build over the next 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years from now. So I think there's different aspects to that.
And when you all, started this venture, did you kind of sit down and hash out some of those goals for the next 10, 20 years, like you mentioned?
Yeah, so we kind of sat down, and of course I had started it, and I had the most experience, but my kids did show cow, they were in the dairy game. And what we decided is that we really liked to have cattle that had great frames, great conformation. We want movement in the horns, or character, as I call it. I don't care what they're doing. We don't typically like straight horned animals. I would rather have twist. I would rather have high rolling Harley Davidson type horns, but I call it character. There's some type of movement going on. The secondary thing, which is a little more, it's a little harder for most people to envision or see, is transmitting ability. And what I mean by that is, as we're looking through pedigrees, are we getting something that's fairly consistent? I think everything about genetics is hedging your bets. And if we were going to go to the casino and lay money down, what are the odds that I'm going to win this hand? So if I see a cow that I'm looking at, and then I see her mother and her grandmother, and they're all the style of cow that I really want or am looking at, then I'm hedging my bets that her offspring would be. If I see a cow that I like, and then I look at her mother, and she's not what I like, and her grandmother's not what I like, then my odds on winning that hand lessen quite a bit. So we're looking for consistent, strong cow families. I mean, there's certain bloodlines. I think, looking back, and I had the fortitude to spend a lot of time studying and looking back at what has worked. Sometimes people get caught up in new bulls that are either marketed or popular because they won something. And my question always is, well, what did they produce? Because that to me, that's more important. If I have a really fancy looking bull that does not produce himself, then I'm better off with an average looking bull that will actually produce what I'm looking for. So in all of that, we're looking for that transmitting ability along with the functional traits that we looked at. So if you look through our herd, you'll see a lot of twist, a lot of larger frame cows, width, from the front end to the back end. And I also want depth, that sideline profile. There's a lot of cattle that are very deep in the front end and don't have a lot of rear end to them. And to me, I'm always looking to make that next generation a little bit better than the last. And I think that goes back to your previous question is, yeah, we all want to breed a 90, 100-inch cow that looks great, but sometimes that's incremental. It takes time. So, is what you're doing improving on the generation before, or did you go backwards? And I think there's a lot to that. New people, unfortunately, I think, again, I've said this too. One of the reasons that tip to tip became so popular in color, those are the two things that don't take any skill. Anybody can run a tape measure and measure horn. Anybody can look at an animal and say, oh, she's pretty. But then it takes a level of skill and education to actually break down an animal to see how good she really is. So when a majority of people can do something, that'll drive a market. When a lower amount of people can do it, it stays under the radar, so to speak, I guess. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sorry. So with that being said, are you worried at all about there being a market for the animals you're breeding, the traits you're focusing on, or are you kind of following through with what it sounds like your family philosophy is, and you're breeding animals that you like, that fit the criteria, of what you think a complete animal is, and at the end of the day, if you're happy with it, you're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is a business to a degree, so I do believe we're just evolutionizing what we have to another level. Yes, if I don't like to look at them, then to me, we're not doing the right things. Mm-hmm. But the same token, and I equate it to this too, a few years ago, there were a relatively small number of 90-inch cows, made them very valuable. Today, there's a lot of 90-inch cows. What separates one cow from another at this point that are 90 inches? And to me, the next evolution is transmissibility and conformation. So if I have a really great cow that is functionally or conformationally correct and she's 90 inches, well, that's kind of like I've hit the holy grail, or 100 inches. We can use that. But we're not going to move horn length, over the last 15 years, basically we've moved horn length 30 to 35 inches. You're not going to do that again over the next 15 years. We're reaching critical mass there. So something else has to come along. When you chase single trait situations, which some people do, not everybody, and I'm not bashing on that. Typically what I have found is, because we saw this in the dairy world, when you're chasing a single trait, you're also taking from something else. You can move things incrementally, but if you're doing it extremely fast, there's only so much genetic material in an animal, so usually you're drawing from somewhere else. And it may be something that you can see or not see, such as conformation you can see, fertility, milking ability, you really don't see until later on. Are they breeding? Are they milking? So over time, you can incrementally do that. So I think, and one of the things to be the leader of the market, sometimes you have to be ahead of the market. You have to be doing what's popular. You got to be doing what's popular 5 years from now today to be in the driver's seat. So again, at the end of the day, my goal is to have a cow that lives to 20 years old, produces calves 17, 18 years, trouble-free. It can pass her genetics on to the next generation. And if we're doing that, we'll always have a market.
Hidden Springs Ranch, located in central North Carolina, is committed to registered Texas Longhorns. From our high-end breeding stock down to our delicious Longhorn beef sticks, check us out at hslonghorns.com or on Instagram at Hidden Springs Ranch. Hidden Springs Ranch, where they're bred to turn heads.
Looking for top-quality Longhorns and a taste of true Texas spirit? Look no further than Cantera Cattle Company. Our passion for Longhorns shines at Old Gringo Ranch, where tradition meets excellence. Visit us online at CanteraCattleCompany.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for the latest updates and ranch life fun. Ready to experience it yourself? Schedule your visit by emailing CanteraCattle@gmail.com. Remember, God is great, Longhorns are good, and life is crazy.
Love what you're hearing? Be sure to check out our Pickup Truck Confessions. It's a video series where we hop in the truck or rental car and interview a variety of breeders about what drives their passion for their livestock, how they got started in the breed of their choice, marketing tips, and more. And now back to the podcast.
You've talked a little bit about traits that don't particularly appeal to you and some that have. Do you think there's any trends, whether they be current or coming up in the market, that we're going to start seeing influencing more breeding decisions?
That are currently in the market that are you talking about influencing breeding decisions to a positive aspect or a negative, I guess? I mean,
either just
the question.
Just in general, I like to get folks feel of kind of like what the market trends are or what they think are coming up, and kind of if they're going to embrace them, adapt to them, if they're not concerned about them. So kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah, I answered it to a degree because I work in so my other career is in financial services. So I always kind of talk about this. In the stock market, by the time you figure out something's doing well, most of the money's been made. So in genetics, when you start to chase a trend, most of the money's been probably made by the front guys. So the idea is how to get ahead of that and create the trend. So a couple of things that I've seen since I've been in it 3.5 years is, one of the things that was really, really intriguing to me was the black and white trend. We had brown Swiss and we had red and white Holsteins. And red and white is a recessive, just like so I understand all the color combinations, genetics, and all that. And back in the 60s, if you had a red and white calf born, people would get rid of it because they didn't want anybody to know that gene was in there in the black and white world. So then they started to become popular. It took 30 to 35 years to get cattle caught up genetically to the black and whites because you were taking it. Black is dominant, so I warn people all the time, it's great to have black and white cattle, but black is dominant. You can have all black and white cattle pretty quickly, and it'll take you twice as long to get back what you lost. So you have to be careful there. So the black and white trend is very interesting to me, because we spent 30 years trying to get rid of black and white Holsteins, just to add that color. So some of the trends that I see that concern me a little bit is the trend of just jumping on these young bulls early. I think, for a bull to be proven, he's 5 to 6 years old before I know what a 2 or 3 year old looks like. So a lot of times people are stacking numbers on numbers with horn length and say, hey, this is going to be the next best thing. I had an old guy when I was in 4-H that explained to me genetics very simply, and it stuck with me my whole life in cattle. And he said, I was showing, registered cattle. I was like 14, 15 years old. He said, if you want to breed cattle, you have to understand genetics. And this is simply the most basic way to explain genetics. If you take the best cow and the best bull in your mind on paper, it's going to create the greatest offspring ever. Here's what will happen. 25% of the time, you're going to get something phenomenal. 50% of the time, you're going to get about what you started with. No better, no worse. And then 25% of the time, you're going to get something you can't figure out how it ever happened, but not backwards. He says, if you can understand that, you can breed cattle. And that stuck with me my whole life. And if you actually look at that, like, I'm the oldest of 6. I have a brother, I'm like 5'9". My brother's 6'2", and he's got black hair. He has hair. I don't have hair. I have a sister that's like 5 foot, So if you look at your brothers and sisters, they're exactly the same genetics, parents, but they're different. And that's the way cattle's are. So I think a naivety sometimes with new cattle breeders is that, I can take this bull and this cow and I'm going to get this great animal. And in truth, that's not necessarily true. And one of the things I struggle with coming from the dairy world is even in the AI industry, the semen on longhorn bulls is rather expensive. We haven't done AI yet. I bred cows for 40 years. We could. But you sometimes really have to look at, if I'm going to breed a cow AI, it's usually going to, on average, take 2 straws of semen, 2 cycles. So that's going to be, if the semen's $300 a unit, that's $600 if it's heifer sexed. If it's, it might be $400 if it's conventional. if I'm using that on a marginal cow, is the value of the calf actually going to be increased by $600? And if it's not, then maybe I don't want to be doing that, So, and sometimes it will be. You can get the right bull, the right cross, and yeah, I can take maybe a calf that was going to be worth $2,000 or $3,000, make it worth $4,000 or $5,000. That's logical sense. But sometimes I've seen people use, really expensive semen on a average cow, and then the calf really isn't worth any more than it would have been if it was out something else. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
I know we're getting very deep in the woods here.
Let's switch gears a little bit. I feel like in all of your answers so far, I feel like there's great advice in there for folks that are listening, but let's hone in on advice specifically. I'll give you a few different topics. So, what advice specifically would you give to someone who hasn't bought their first animals yet? They're looking to get into the breed.
Talk to people. First of all, find something you like and then talk to somebody. Again, my style of cow is not for everybody. And I equate this to the dairy breeds again, because somebody said, well, you just like a certain style of cow. I said, no, I like good cows. I milked Holsteins in Swiss. My neighbor milked Jerseys. I would never milk a Jersey. They're half the size of a Holstein, but I would say that's a really good Jersey cow, right? So you can have different types of cows that are good. So first of all, you got to find what flavor you like. Some people love straight horn cows. Great, awesome. I don't knock that. For me, it's not what because one of the things I think you have to understand is that to get good at something, you have to focus on certain things. If you're trying to just do everything, you're never really going to get good at it. So what flavor do you like? And then find people who have that type of animal and start talking to them. One of the biggest things for us, and I don't mean to knock on that, is, it took me, I had 40 years of experience in breeding cattle. And it really took me almost a year before I found somebody that could speak my language. But I just kept asking questions. And when they did, it was like a light bulb went off. Okay, well, they could talk about cow families. They could talk about pedigrees. They could talk about type. And looking at that, and now the door just opened up. So I think you got to find somebody. The other thing I will say for a brand new person is you don't have to go broke to build a herd. I see that happen sometimes. Somebody brand new gets in and they probably are overspending based on the amount of experience they have. And I'm not saying that the cows aren't worth it, but if you're going to start off with something and make mistakes, it probably shouldn't be a top end animal. So for our herd, we're 3.5 years in. Up to this point, I'm not saying I never would. I've never spent $10,000 on an animal, So, but we built a herd, which I feel is a pretty good herd of where we want to go with some really good genetics by being patient, in having numbers. If a cow's in a sale and it goes for more than I think it should, I'm not chasing that. I will try to figure out where their daughters are. I'll try to figure out where I could get those genetics, or what other genetics are out there. It's interesting to me, like there's 20 cows probably around the country right now that I'm tracking. I know where they are. I watch them on people's websites, and I know if they pop up in a sale and maybe they sold too much, and then the next sale they pop up, well, I can get her, So I'm aware of where things are because there's stuff that I do want to add to the herd. So I think, number one is figure out what you like. And if it's just yard art, awesome, no problem. Number two is, don't overspend. And number three is talk to people that are doing a similar thing or have been in it. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of where I would go.
What would your advice be to breeders who want to get started outside of kind of where the hub of the country is, right? So you're in New York, so I know you have to have some advice related to that.
Yeah, you have to be willing to, so that's our biggest challenge right now is what we're trying to do is create local markets because we just don't really have a whole lot. We are basically, our nearest show sale would be the Netless sale, which is 4 hours plus. The next nearest thing for us would be Virginia, which is 7.5 hours. I go out to the Michigan Futurity every year. That's 9 hours. So we're 9 hours, 7 to 9 hours from the fringe of anything. So part of that is, trying to create local markets if you're out on the fringe. But what you have to be able to do is be willing to travel also to either go visit people or at least get on the phone and talk to people. I love talking to people, but nothing beats seeing either animals or facilities or ranches in person, just to get ideas. So there's more work involved in that as far as just trying to, get to things and see things. It's funny. I hear people when we're at sale. I was at, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we're going next weekend. We're going to here," and but it only took them 3 hours to get to this one. It only took them 2 hours to get to that one, right? And for us, it's like, well, I'm going to go home. It'll take me 9 hours. Next week, I'd have to travel 15 hours. So we don't hit as many things as we would like to. But the other thing I will say, you guys, one of the greatest tools I have is Hired Hand Live. I watch every sale. I don't bid on everything, but at least I'm able to see cattle. I can see what I like. Maybe, hey, there's 3 daughters of this bull in there that I'm looking at. There's, whatever it is. But I get to view a lot of cattle that way, watching the sales that I normally wouldn't see.
How important? So I know, you just mentioned Hired Hand Live, which kind of it's changed the landscape a little bit the past few years, especially, but how important do you think it is for serious people who want to be serious breeders to attend some of those events in person and network in person and really see the animals in person?
I think it's crucial. I don't think you have to do it every weekend, but you have to have a strategical thought process. If you're going to do this as a business or long term, it's kind of like, maintenance on your car. If I don't do any maintenance on my car, it's not going to run very long. So I've never missed an event in Virginia since we started, since we went to the first one. So they have one in the fall, one in the spring. Now, sometimes I'm not there to buy cattle. I'm not there to show cattle. I'm just there to talk to people, right? I was actually at one not too long ago, and I've been there 4 or 5 times, but I met new people, and you're conversing. And some people have been in the industry. I just had never had a chance to meet them. So I think networking is huge. If I had not gone to that event, I never would have ran into Johnny Hicks, which is totally what changed our program, because he was able to point me in the direction that I wanted to go. It wasn't that he was trying to coerce me or anything like that. He was like, well, based on what you're telling me, these are some people you should check out. Mm-hmm. So that was imperative. The other thing I will say is the Longhorn community by far in general is much more sociable and friendly, and everybody wants to see everybody win in comparison to like a lot of other breeds, even in the dairy world. It was way more competitive. It was way more. I've had cows get across the country by getting, relayed by 2 or 3 people. I've hauled cows for people just because I happen to be somewhere. So getting that kind of community, I think is extraordinary. You don't get that in a lot of places.
I would completely agree. So I was kind of hoping your kids would be on for this next question, but do you have any funny stories you can share with us of ranch happenings or lessons learned or anything?
Oh, there's a couple, but so sometimes, you have everything from, forgetful dad leaving the gate open to the neighbor's call. It's funny because where we live, we have our driveway and then there's trees. So people have no idea that we have between, if we're counting calves and everything, 60, somewhere around 60 head running around up in upstate New York that you can't see from the road. So nobody really knows they're there. And when one gets out on the road for some reason, that's a big deal. And, I have neighbors call me and, they're all free. But one day we had our bull and we have one section of fence and we have a lot of deer up there. So I made the classic mistake when we first got started, and I could get away with it because I was a cow guy. I just put up some poly wire, plastic posts, a few metal posts here and there. So we have some of our original pastures that are still like that. And people who want to get out sometimes can. So we had a bull. And so one day I'm sitting at the house and a sheriff pulls in and he's sitting there and I kind of went out and I go, oh, what's up? He goes, oh, well, one of your steers is out. My partner's bringing them up the road. And I'm like, partner? So immediately, as soon as he said, I knew it was our bull dropping dimes. He was like 2 and he just he could go over the fence and there was a back driveway. He'd walk out there and then walk on the road and walk down and he'd come into where we stored the hay and he'd feed himself. And so I thought he meant that he was basically, walking them up the street. Well, next thing I know, here comes the bull. He's just trotting along, walking up the driveway with a police car with lights on following them, and I'm like, okay, this is great. And then the other story is we took the animals down to my son-in-law's parents' place in North Carolina, let them off, and they had a nice fence. They high tensiled. They did everything right. And we let them off, and I'm sitting there watching, and the pasture kind of went over, and I go, I don't think that cow's still in. And one of the cows got off, and it was a small area, but it walked right over. I'd never seen her do this at home. Took her horn, spread the high tensile fence, walked out. It took us 3 days to catch that. She traveled the whole county. She was the news for Alamance County. I think that's how you say it, North Carolina. So there was a Facebook page dedicated to sightings of this longhorn 2-year-old, cruising the county. And
that's some great free marketing, though.
Oh yeah. So it finally we got her, corralled. But every time we had a chance to get it, like one time I basically could pet her, but she was on the side of a road. And I just didn't have any way to grab her, and she looked at me and sniffed the grain, and then she just kept on walking, and she was trying to figure out how to get home, I think. But so that was another story. So
I feel like the question with those types of stories are, did she come back and then have a calf of a different nature the next breeding season?
No, she actually had a calf. So
nice.
Because I was one of my questions too. We visited some Angus herds. She had visited a few, but they had her caught a couple of times at different people's, and she'd do the same thing. She knew to take her horns and twist the fence and walk right through it, and so it was interesting. But never did it at home.
At least she didn't start holding it open for all of her friends to follow out with her.
so that was an adventure. But
From the Pasture by Hired Hand is presented by R3 Hilltop Ranch. Located in Chilton, Texas, R3 Hilltop Ranch has been breeding registered Texas Longhorns since 2006. What began as 3 heifers has grown into our current herd, which you can explore on our website at r3hilltop.com. We're passionate about loud colors, longhorns, and docile temperaments, but it's the easy-keeping, low-maintenance traits of Texas Longhorns that initially attracted us and continue to drive our herd growth. In addition to livestock, we proudly offer certified Longhorn beef products. Visit r3hilltop.com/beef to learn more. Thank you for listening and enjoy exploring our ranch online at r3hilltop.com.
Hey, if you love From the Pasture with Hired Hand, why not go check out my podcast, The Big Iron Podcast with Andrew Shigori, where we dive into the world of registered Texas Longhorns and what it means to be an agriculture entrepreneur in the modern world, with a little southern flair, of course. Find The Big Iron Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you sometimes feel like you're the only one who doesn't have it all figured out? Rural life can be isolating, but it doesn't have to be.
Welcome to Ag's Most Okayest Farm Girls, the podcast for women who are craving connection, laughter, solidarity, camaraderie, and just overall encouragement in your everyday life and dreams.
Each week, your hosts, Annalise, that's me, and Courtney will cover topics such as farm life, mom life, making money online, side hustles, hobbies, sharing on social media, jobs off the farm, and so much more.
Us rural gals need to stick together, so saddle up for some fun, real, and unsolicited advice and stories from our everyday farm lives.
Grab a drink, we're Ag's Most Okayest Farm Girls, and we're here to help. Listen wherever you find podcasts.
Well, so you touched on a couple herds already. You mentioned Tom Smith, Mark Hubble, the Albaneses. Who are some other herds or breeders that you really admire and just enjoy seeing what's on their website, watching their breeding strategy?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Obviously, I think Johnny Hicks has done a tremendous job up there. He's got some great cattle that are very kind of uniform. I think probably his Hydro Bull, which I know Wayne Manning and those guys are involved with now, is probably an underrated bull in the industry as far as putting on udders and rump width and milking. Hidden Springs, Carol Powell down in North Carolina. They've got some cows down there that I really, really admire. The Flamethrower cow, especially. Trying to think of other places. Hubble, if you want to get old school, again, we're back up in Michigan. Dick Lowe, he's had some great cows over the years. And I've got a couple cows that go back to his or from his place that I had to be patient and wait and get, but that style, and I think there's a lot of people. One of the things about the, hired hand, especially the visibility that you can see on websites. I really admire the guys that are. I can pick out what they're trying to do. Some people, it's kind of just, they're buying cows, but I can't figure out the game plan. Again, looking for that style that I like.
So you mentioned that you see almost every sale on Hired Hand Live. Who is one person you hate bidding against on Hired Hand Live?
Oh, there's a few. I'm not in the league with some of these people, so it's immediately like, typically there's a few people that, if they want something, their pocketbook's a little bigger than mine. So but it's interesting. I don't bid on a lot of animals, but the ones I'm bid on, there's a reason why I'm bidding on them and I want them. But I'm also very aware of, so I don't want to name names on that one. But.
All right. Most folks don't, but I still ask. If you had to pick one cow in the entire Longhorn industry, dead or alive, as your favorite, who would it be?
Oh, that's a loaded question too, because I, obviously haven't seen a tremendous amount of cows. I would probably, go back to W.S. Sunrise just because of the influence she's had through all of her daughters, all of her sons, what Tom's done with that. And there's a couple other cows that again, when I'm looking at cows from the way I look at them, it takes a really special cow to make me stop in my tracks. And there's a few of them out there that are on some ranches that, some people know that I like those cows. Some people don't, because I'm hoping they turn up someday. But
what about same question except for bull?
That's good. I was thinking about this, and to me, I really liked what Jamaicanism did for the breed from a longevity standpoint and very predictable for the most part. If you jump on our website, you'll see we've got a couple Jamaicanism daughters. One of them has one horn. The horn was froze off, and I still bought her intentionally because she's out of the LL Aphrodite cow. And that cow's got the most correct conformation, beautiful frame to her. She's never going to, she's one horn. We call her unicorn, basically. But it wasn't about the heifer. It was about what I could do with that heifer in the next generation, so adding those genetics in, and again, which is contradictory to a lot in the Longhorn world, because Jamaicanism genetics tend to grow slower in horn, but they have a twist. They have a lot of times color with the brindle, but they have the bodies and the frames that I typically like. So again, everything I think in the world is a matter of perspective. So, the straightest or the shortest point between, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So if I have genetics with twist, very, very automatically it's going to take longer. Now it doesn't, nothing's certain, nothing's always going to be that way. But if I'm breeding for twist genetics or horn character, my tip to tip's never going to be as quick as somebody's going in a straight line. I'm okay with that, you know. I see a lot of heifers that are 70-inch 2-year-olds that are 85-inch 6-year-olds. I would rather have a heifer that's 55, 60 inches as a 2-year-old and 90 inches as a 6, 7-year-old. Mm-hmm. So again, I think everything's a matter of perspective, you know.
Well, you mentioned Andrew Shigori and Hidden Springs earlier. Jamie and I recently did a crossover episode with him on his podcast, and he put us in the question seat on our favorite bulls, and we both picked Jamaichism as well. So
really, I heard half of that podcast actually yesterday, and I haven't heard the other half, so I missed that question. Yeah. So,
well, I have a few rapid fire questions here for you if you're up for it.
I'll try to make them short and sweet.
All right. What is your favorite farm tool?
My skid loader, you know.
What's your, go ahead. Sorry.
You know, puts hay out. We can do everything with it, you know.
What about your go-to feed?
Feed for us, I mean, it's just our baleage and hay, I guess. Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. We feed a lot of hay and baleage. You know.
Dream ranch location?
Somewhere south of New York. I don't know if I would enjoy Texas, but maybe, you know, get anywhere, the Carolinas, Virginia, Kentucky, that kind of area. Just a little warmer. The older I get, the less I like the snow.
Same. Ideal herd size?
For us right now, it's about 25 mature cows, and then whatever young stock and bulls we're having. We're a little higher than that. It's 20 to 25. Last winter, we carried a little bit more, and typically it wouldn't have been a problem, but we had a fantastic winter as far as weather, but the ground never froze, and we dealt with mud for 4 or 5 months, which made a nightmare. So the ground's frozen, it doesn't matter, but, you know, so really 20 to 25 cows right now. If we had a different place, they're like candy. I mean, you can't stop. I would have probably 50, you know.
Instagram or Facebook?
That's a great question. For me, it's Facebook because I'm old. My kids, it's Instagram and all that stuff. I don't even know how to do it, so I get yelled at when I make Facebook posts that are wrong. So that's a question I'd like to expand on too. So again, the kids aren't on here, but you know, I have the genetic ability in vision area of the thought process. Mackenzie and Alex are very good on the social media marketing aspect, digging into things. You know, Alex is a real student of the game. And Zach, my son, he's more of the behind the scenes, daily chores, you know, green chopping, working with cattle, hauling cattle, that kind of thing. So together, we all kind of work together to create what we need to create. And usually I'm at an event and one of them will be with me. Sometimes they'll go, you know, so.
I feel like this might be the most important of the rapid fire questions. Do you call it Coke, soda, or pop?
Where we're from, it's soda. Yeah.
I'm still waiting for someone to answer pop. That's what we call it.
That's Western New York. So you just got to get out towards Rochester, Buffalo. Yeah.
I thought for sure maybe you'd be on my side for that one.
No, it's close. Rochester, it's funny. Syracuse and Rochester are about an hour and a half apart. And that's where the line is. Rochester people say pop. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's. You've touched on your website and on using the internet to help your research strategy. How much time in general do you think you spend looking at Longhorn websites in a week?
It was funny. My wife was in here earlier reading through the questions, and she wrote 24/7. I spend probably 2 to 3 hours a day. Honestly, maybe 5 days, 6 days a week. So before we were doing this, I was at lunch, you know, and while I'm at lunch, I'm scrolling through websites. at night, I don't watch TV. If I'm going to do something that's going to be productive, it gives me something. So I'll be on, I'm a late person. My wife's an early riser. I stay up late. So I just, scroll through websites and see what's there. And I think that was a habit that started when I got going early on, because I knew a lot, but what I needed was to educate myself on bloodlines and stuff. So I just became very focused on tracking that kind of stuff. And now it's just habit almost. It's probably I guess there could be worse habit, right, Mom?
Could be, for sure. Do you use our pedigree simulator at all when you find some animals you like?
I have not. Alex has. He's always sending me pictures of. He'll put like one of our bulls with this cow and say, "Hey, this is what it looked like," So he's all over that. He loves that thing, and I just haven't, because it's another button I got to find to figure out what I'm doing. So I'm the type of person, if the computer turns on when it's supposed to, we're good. If it doesn't, I call somebody. I don't know what's going on.
So if I put you on the spot and ask you if you can remember the last 3 Longhorns or Longhorn sites in your search history, are you willing to share them with us, or is that top secret?
No, it's not top secret, because I'm a browser, so it doesn't really matter. CR3, I was on that. Young guy down in Pennsylvania, Raven Crest, Dayton, Hess. What was the one before that? Oh, that was Hidden Springs. Yeah. So, but it's funny. I play a game with that. Like sometimes I'm looking for stuff on purpose, and then other times, like when I'm up at night, I like start with the states that are nearest to me, obviously. But then when you get on to Texas, there's like so many. They'll be like, "Who's somebody I've never been on?" And I'll go to their website and I start looking through. And if there's anything that catches my eye or pedigrees. And sometimes I send out emails. So this is a great story. So I sent out an email to a young guy that just got on the website probably in the last 6 months before I saw it. And I saw something that was interesting. And I just sent an email and said, "Hey, I really like this animal. I see you're relatively new. I'd love to chat with you sometime, talk about philosophies." And I get an email back the next day and he goes, "Is this for real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not, it's, because I love to do that. I love to just brainstorm with people, and how are you looking at something? Because again, even though I've done it for a while and I have a concise picture, I'm not above listening to somebody else's perspective or point of view. Mm-hmm. And so then I'm always looking, okay, well, let me look at it from that angle. Let me look at it from this angle. So I think the greatest things can be accomplished with working together versus, everybody trying to do their own thing, So I'm notorious for that. I'll just random, never seen this one. Let's take a look at it.
Well, what haven't I asked you yet that you want to share about your program or advice for folks listening? Anything we haven't covered?
No, I think if you can make it, it was fun when it was myself, but when when the family got involved, it became a whole different thing. Now, I'm 53 years old. So when I was doing it for myself, you're looking at, it's a 15, 20 year window probably. Now we're looking at 50, 60 years, if we want to do it that way. My first grandchild was just born. And so it's like, okay, well, there's a whole lifespan there. What could you develop over time? So I think getting the family involved is awesome. The other thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to people. I've never, ever called somebody and they pick up the phone and said, "Why did you call me?" Or you shouldn't have. They're always happy to talk. Ross Suber, I'd never met him, talked with him a couple times, and I was like, just very engaging conversations. Mike Willinger, is another one where I was chatting with. And again, most people unfortunately are like me. They're addicted to cattle, so they don't mind. We would rather talk about cows than watch football or anything else, so that's fun. But for new people, get out and look at places. Don't be afraid to talk to people. And again, in the beginning, don't get overexcited. I mean, try to figure out the game plan. Don't do things just to do them. What's the reason behind it? And that goes back to our ranch name. Why? Why am I? Every time I'm looking at a cow, why am I interested in this cow? Why am I, willing to pay this much for this cow? Why am I, so that's really where it all ties back together.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We will link your website and some of the other breeders' websites that you mentioned in our show notes, and I really appreciate it and wish you the best.
Well, thank you very much, Molly.